I'm going to go even further back. So I'm going to go back to the beginnings of monotheism in the world. And monotheism, because I have my notes here, Derek. I'm like, this is such an interesting topic, Jesus and Osiris. And people can roll their eyes and say, no, you can't talk about these things. And it's absolutely not the case. The comparisons are real. And in some cases, I would argue quite direct, not just abstract, like people think of divinity in similar ways in different parts of the world, but there can be direct contact between Egypt and the Levant. And these things are documented in the biblical text as well. So I don't see this as that outlandish or strange or bizarre.
Mm-hmm.
And when Christianity was taking root in Egypt, the old polytheistic ways formed and shaped that Christianity in Egypt in the same way that polytheism in Italy or polytheism in the Levant shaped the Christianity that was the Jesus cult that was growing there. But more, well, just to start it off, there is even the suspicion in my mind that monotheism was invented in Egypt by a king named Akhenaten, ruling around 1320 BCE, actually a little before that, like 1350 BCE. And this guy used to be named Amenhotep, and he changed his name to Akhenaten, the one who is beneficial for the sun in the sky. And he says that there are no other gods. He funnels money only to his god, the Aten. He builds temples that have no idol, that are open to the sky. You only worship this sun disk. And he pushes this religion, and it is an aberrant and top-down religion that only lasts some 17 years. And this religion then dies out, so we think. It goes dormant, it goes dark. And yet a couple hundred years later, maybe around 800, 700, if you're looking at your book of Second Kings, and you see that, or you look at Exodus, right? And you see this idea that there is one God, and it's a God of fire, or a God that is speaking to you, a God that is pervasive throughout the world. This idea of one divinity and one divinity alone is potentially something that started in Egypt and then was quashed, but then had roots that went to other places and then found a new way of coming into the Levant, and was very useful for those purposes. So I would actually argue that, well, Jesus has Osirian roots, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. I think that monotheism itself, this idea that we move polytheism aside, the worship of many gods, and we call it paganism, we call it the religion of the simple folk. We move that aside, and we have a different understanding of divinity. I think that's you can go further back. So I'll start with that. Does that make sense? This idea that monotheism itself could have an Egyptian source?
Absolutely. And this is the automatic thought that came to my mind, was that, well, some people might try to argue, oh, well, the monotheism was actually influenced by some other group. And typically my research has led me to think it's really the ruling people that typically, it's from the top down, the influence happens. So to argue that, monotheism came from the Bible, right? Like, imagine a Christian apologist trying to defend and say the Bible's right and everybody else is wrong. Like, this small people in the Levant, okay, like their ideas are going to impact the rulers and kings of pharaohs and whatnot? Or is it more likely the ruling people are going to influence the smaller by sending out decrees and telling people what to think and how to worship and what gods and all that? More of a political push, which I think your book, again, plug, promotes this idea and showing. So yeah, monotheism in some way, shape, or form seems to be starting here in Egypt and working.
And I make the case in the Good Kings that it is a political push by Akhenaten, that this monotheism is very useful politically, because it's like a litmus test of who's with you or who's against you. It's a very black or white ideology, and that's extraordinarily useful for Akhenaten in the short term. Then it goes away, then it comes back.